It's 2 a.m. as I type this on my phone, unable to sleep as the events of the past year replay in my mind. Maybe someone can learn from the train wreck my life became. I'm Nathan, 34, and until recently, I thought I had built a solid life with my wife Rebecca, 32. We had the perfect suburban home in Boston, both earning six-figure salaries in finance, and to everyone in our social circle, we were that enviable couple who seemed to have everything figured out. Our massive Maine Coon cat Apollo was essentially our first child, a beautiful silver-gray furball who'd curl up on my chest every night and attack my toes precisely at 5:15 a.m. without fail. Rebecca always joked that Apollo was more my cat than hers, and she wasn't wrong. He followed me everywhere, even sitting on the bathroom counter while I shaved every morning, batting at the foam. For 3 years, we tried to have a baby. 3 long, emotionally draining years. At first, it was exciting and full of hope, planning nursery themes and discussing potential names after each attempt. But after countless negative pregnancy tests, the excitement morphed into a dark cloud hanging over our marriage. Each month followed the same pattern: hope, disappointment, awkward silence, repeat. We'd sit on opposite ends of the couch, neither knowing what to say anymore. Better luck next month felt hollow after the first year passed. I still vividly remember finding Rebecca sobbing on our bedroom floor after her period arrived yet again, clutching a tiny pair of baby shoes she'd impulsively bought. Meanwhile, our social media feeds filled with pregnancy announcements and perfect family photos from friends and colleagues, each one a sharp reminder of what we couldn't seem to achieve. After numerous tests and specialist appointments, doctors couldn't pinpoint any specific problem. We fell into that frustrating category of unexplained infertility. Nothing definitively wrong, yet nothing working as it should. Rebecca suggested IVF one evening, her voice trembling as she explained it might be our best chance. I agreed immediately, believing we were a team facing this challenge together. That's what marriage is supposed to be, right? A partnership through the hardest times. The financial aspect was daunting. Insurance covered only a portion, forcing us to withdraw a significant amount from our investments and savings. But I reasoned it would be worth every penny to finally start our family. Rebecca took charge of the entire IVF process, insisting I was already stressed with my recent promotion and that she'd handle all the appointments and paperwork. "Just routine stuff," she'd say. "The clinic will only call if there's something important." I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? I attended what I thought were the key appointments, including the actual embryo transfer. I held her hand while the doctor explained the procedure, thinking this was our special moment, the beginning of our family story. I even took a photo of us in the clinic room to commemorate what I believed was the day our child's life began. Rebecca seemed genuinely happy, and for the first time in years, I felt true hope returning to our marriage. The first trimester progressed smoothly. Rebecca's morning sickness was minimal, and we started transforming the guest room into a nursery. I spent an entire weekend painting the walls a soft sage green, while Apollo helped by repeatedly walking through the paint tray and leaving tiny paw prints across the hardwood floor. We agreed not to learn the gender, wanting to be surprised at birth. Rebecca had names picked out for either possibility, and we began building a future together. At least that's what I thought we were doing. Her pregnancy progressed normally, she reached the 5-month mark and was clearly showing. I grew increasingly excited about becoming a father, even downloading those apps that tell you your baby's size each week. Your baby is now the size of an avocado. And reading all the parenting books Rebecca brought home. One unremarkable Tuesday night, everything changed. Rebecca had gone to bed early, and I was at the kitchen table sorting through insurance paperwork to ensure everything was covered for the delivery. Apollo was purring contentedly in my lap as I organized the medical forms and receipts we'd accumulated. That's when I noticed something unusual, a donor ID code on one of the forms that didn't match my patient information. At first, I assumed I was just tired and misreading it. But after double-checking against my own patient number from another document, they clearly didn't match. Something cold settled in my chest as I stared at the discrepancy. I told myself it had to be a clerical error, that the clinic had simply mixed up the paperwork. There's no way Rebecca would... She couldn't have? Would she? I didn't sleep that night, just lay there beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I even knew the woman sleeping next to me. The following morning, I waited until Rebecca left for her prenatal yoga class before driving straight to the fertility center. I sat in the parking lot for nearly half an hour, trying to gather the courage to go inside because deep down, I think I already suspected what I would discover. When I finally entered, I approached the receptionist with forced calmness, explaining that I was reviewing some paperwork for my wife's treatment and noticed something unusual. Could she please confirm which embryo was used in our procedure? The woman, Sarah according to her nameplate, smiled pleasantly and began typing on her computer. I watched her expression shift from professional friendliness to confusion to concern. "That's strange," she said, frowning at her screen. "It appears the embryo used wasn't the one originally designated for your case." My heart pounded painfully as Sarah continued examining the records. "It looks like a donor specimen was used instead," she explained, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "But that should have required your signed consent." I struggled to keep my voice steady as I replied, "I never signed anything authorizing a change." Sarah checked the file again and said, "According to our records, your wife authorized the change independently." Everything inside me went cold. "So you just switched embryos without verifying with me?" I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Sarah's face paled. "That's absolutely not supposed to happen. We have protocols specifically to prevent that." She began explaining about getting a supervisor, but I was already heading for the exit. I needed to confront Rebecca immediately. I called my boss during the drive home, explaining I had a family emergency. Something in my voice must have conveyed the severity of the situation, because he didn't ask questions, just told me to take whatever time I needed. I drove too fast, my thoughts racing even faster. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This moment, I realized, would forever divide my life into before and after. I walked through the front door and slammed it behind me, causing Apollo to bolt from his favorite windowsill perch. To my surprise, Rebecca was home, sitting on our living room sofa with reddened eyes and trembling hands. Before I could say anything, she looked up and said, "You went to the fertility center." It wasn't a question, and that's when I knew with absolute certainty this wasn't just some administrative error. I stood silently in the entryway, momentarily unable to speak. "My friend Danielle works there," Rebecca explained softly. "She texted that you were asking questions and seemed upset." I clenched my jaw so tightly it hurt. "Is that the same friend who helped you switch the embryos?" Rebecca inhaled sharply, her body visibly flinching, which told me everything I needed to know. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice coming out unnaturally calm. Rebecca rubbed her face, looking anywhere but at me. At one point, she tried reaching for my hand, but I stepped backward as if she were offering me something dangerous. "You wouldn't understand," she eventually said, still avoiding eye contact. "I just wanted the best for our baby. I wanted stronger genes, healthier genes." "Meaning?" I prompted when she paused. Rebecca hesitated before finally admitting, "I used a donor from the clinic's database, someone with better genetic traits." I felt as though I'd been physically struck. Better than mine? I laughed humorlessly, not because anything was remotely funny, but because the magnitude of this betrayal bordered on absurdity. "The donor has no family history of diabetes or Alzheimer's," she hurried to explain. "He's tall, athletic, has advanced degrees in neuroscience." The irony was that my uncle had mild diabetes. Nothing serious, just required medication and diet management. Rebecca knew this. She was essentially saying my family's genetics weren't good enough for her child. "So you decided that without consulting me?" I asked incredulously. "You erased me from our child's life? And you thought that was exclusively your decision to make?" Rebecca stood up, protectively wrapping her arms around her growing belly. "It's still our baby, Nathan. You'll still be the father in every way that matters." Those words ignited something inside me. "Except actually being the father," I shot back. "Except for the part where you lied to me for months. Except for the part where you made this monumental decision behind my back." Apollo had cautiously returned to the room and was sitting in the corner, his wide eyes tracking our movements as if sensing the severity of what was unfolding. "I was trying to do what's best for our family," Rebecca insisted, her voice breaking. "I thought you'd understand if I just what?" I interrupted. "Found out after the baby was born? When exactly were you planning to tell me, Rebecca? Or were you hoping I'd never discover that I was raising another man's child believing it was mine?" When she didn't answer, her silence confirmed what I suspected. She never intended for me to know. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to process everything. "And your friend at the clinic, Danielle, she just helped you commit fraud? Because that's exactly what this is. You forged my consent. You falsified medical documents." Rebecca's eyes widened. "It wasn't like that. Danielle just helped with the administrative side. She didn't forge anything." I laughed bitterly. "Right. She just conveniently bypassed the requirement for my signature before replacing my sperm with some random donors." A long silence followed as Rebecca repeatedly opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Finally, she slumped back onto the sofa, shoulders hunched. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she whispered. "I really did." I grabbed my keys from the counter, needing to escape before saying something I couldn't take back. "Where are you going?" Rebecca asked, her voice small and frightened. "Anywhere but here," I replied, heading toward the door. "I need space to think." As I reached for the doorknob, she called after me, "Nathan, please, we can work through this. We're having a baby." I turned back to face her. "No, Rebecca, you're having a baby. I'm apparently just the guy who's supposed to pay for it." I collected Apollo's carrier from the closet, gathered his food and favorite toys, and gently placed him inside despite his protests. "You're taking the cat?" she asked incredulously. "Yes, I'm taking the cat," I replied flatly. "At least he's actually mine." I walked out without looking back, not knowing where I was going, just that I couldn't remain there another minute. It wasn't until I was several miles away that the full weight of everything crashed down on me. Everything I thought I had, everything we'd built together. It was all based on deception. Apollo meowed plaintively from his carrier in the passenger seat, his paws pressing against the mesh as if trying to comfort me. "Yeah, buddy, I know," I murmured, feeling ridiculous for talking to my cat, but desperately needing some connection to something real. "It's just you and me now." I drove aimlessly for hours before eventually arriving at my friend David's apartment. I hadn't called ahead, just showed up at his door with a cat carrier and what must have been a shell-shocked expression. "Dude, what happened?" was his immediate reaction, followed by "holy shit" as I gave him the condensed version of my day. His girlfriend Melissa arrived midway through my explanation and immediately went into crisis management mode, preparing their spare room and improvising a litter box for Apollo. That night, I couldn't sleep despite physical exhaustion. I just lay in their guest bed with Apollo purring on my chest, staring at the ceiling. I had turned off my phone after the 15th call from Rebecca. I couldn't handle any more lies or explanations. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer named Victoria, a formidable woman who had helped my colleague through a particularly nasty divorce the previous year. When I explained my situation, she listened intently before asking, "If you leave now, what happens with the baby?" After reviewing the details, she explained that being married when the child was born meant I would be legally presumed the father unless I contested paternity. If you don't challenge it, you could still be responsible for child support even though the child isn't biologically yours. The thought made me physically ill. Rebecca had nearly trapped me permanently. "What if I can prove she committed fraud?" I asked. Victoria tapped her pen thoughtfully. "That changes everything. If we can demonstrate she deliberately misled you, you won't be financially liable. But we need solid evidence. Ideally, we need her to admit it in writing or on record." She advised me to move quickly to protect my assets. If she files first, she can argue for half of everything. Something was still bothering me about Rebecca's story of the anonymous donor with perfect genes. It seemed too convenient, too rehearsed. "Can we subpoena the actual donor records from the clinic?" I asked. Victoria nodded. "We can try. They'll resist on privacy grounds, but given these extraordinary circumstances, we might succeed. What are you thinking?" I met her gaze directly. "I'm thinking my wife is still lying to me." Over the next several days, I began getting my affairs in order. First, I transferred most of our shared funds into my individual account, leaving just enough that Rebecca wouldn't immediately notice the withdrawal. It wasn't the most ethical action, but ethics seemed rather beside the point now. I moved all my important documents to David's apartment, passport, birth certificate, the title to my car, and called our credit card companies to freeze any new charges on our joint accounts. Rebecca continued her barrage of calls and texts with messages like, "Please come home," and "We need to talk about this," and the particularly galling, "I still love you." I ignored most of them, sending just one brief text saying I needed space to process everything. Meanwhile, Victoria was working on obtaining access to the donor records. The fertility clinic was fighting the request, citing patient confidentiality protections, but the judge overseeing the case was sympathetic to my situation. After 5 days of staying with David and Melissa, I finally agreed to meet Rebecca at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. I arrived early and selected a table in the far corner. When Rebecca walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked terrible, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She immediately reached for my hands across the table, but I pulled back. "Nathan, please," she began, her voice quavering. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I know you're angry, but we can fix this." I regarded her steadily. "Fix what exactly? The months of lying? The fact that you decided my genetics weren't good enough for our child?" Rebecca flinched at my words. "That's not what it was about," she insisted. "I just wanted the best for our baby." I leaned forward slightly. "Yeah, you've said that, but this anonymous donor story, is that even true?" Her eyes darted away momentarily, just a split-second tell, but it was enough. "Of course it's true," she replied, but her voice had that slight quiver I recognized from our 13 years together. "Who is it really, Rebecca?" I pressed. "Because I'm going to find out one way or another." Our meeting ended without resolution, Rebecca stubbornly sticking to her anonymous donor narrative, despite my catching her in the lie. I returned to David's apartment where Apollo was living his best life, being constantly pampered by Melissa, who kept sneaking him treats when she thought I wasn't looking. At least someone was finding happiness amidst this disaster. For the next week, I lived a strange double life, attending work during the day, pretending everything was normal when colleagues asked about Rebecca and the baby, then meeting with Victoria in the evenings to document our finances and build our case around the IVF situation. One afternoon, I drove back to our house when I knew Rebecca would be at her prenatal appointment. It felt surreal using my own key to enter what had been my home for 7 years. But I needed additional clothes and wanted to check if there was anything else important I should retrieve. That's when I found Rebecca's laptop. She always kept it password protected, but she used the same 3 passwords for everything and had once asked me to write them down when she forgot them. A classic Rebecca move, being simultaneously secretive yet disorganized. I hesitated briefly before logging in. Under normal circumstances, I would never violate someone's privacy like this, but normal had vanished the moment Rebecca decided to lie about our child's paternity. Initially, I found nothing unusual: work emails, online shopping receipts, pregnancy forum discussions. Then I checked her email trash folder. There, I discovered deleted correspondence between Rebecca and her clinic friend Danielle, dating back nearly 14 months. They had been planning this together. Danielle informing Rebecca when she'd be handling patient files so she could process the paperwork. Rebecca asking if it was truly possible to use a different donor without my knowledge. But the real bombshell was an email thread with someone named Alexander, with the subject line, "A, are you absolutely certain about this?" My stomach dropped as I opened the messages and began reading. Alexander Thompson, her college boyfriend whom she dated for 5 years before me, the one she occasionally mentioned when reminiscing about her past, the one whose social media profile she would casually check now and then just to see what he's up to. The emails started innocuously, friendly catching up, how's life been treating you, before Rebecca shared our fertility struggles and confessed she'd been thinking about him frequently. She referenced how they used to discuss having children together back in college, how they'd even picked out potential names. Then came the text that made my blood run cold. She told him she was using his sperm from when he donated to the clinic years ago, apparently a regular habit during medical school for extra money. His response showed surprise, but not anger. He asked if I knew and had consented. Rebecca's reply was unmistakable. Nathan doesn't need to know. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. My hands trembled so violently I could barely take screenshots with my phone. I forwarded key emails to my own account, then carefully deleted the forwarded messages from her sent folder and emptied her trash again. I sat motionless for 20 minutes after closing the laptop, trying to process this devastating revelation. It wasn't some anonymous donor with superior genetics. It was her ex-boyfriend. She wanted to have his baby, not mine. When I returned to David's apartment, I immediately sent everything to Victoria, who called within minutes. "This changes everything," she stated firmly. "This proves premeditation and deliberate deception. The judge is going to be furious." Finding Alexander Thompson wasn't difficult. He was a cardiologist at a hospital approximately 40 minutes from our house. I located him online and instantly recognized him from photos Rebecca had shown me years earlier. Tall with an athletic build, exactly the type of donor fertility clinics pay premium rates for. I made an appointment under a false name, which wasn't ethically ideal but seemed trivial compared to the deception I was uncovering. The shock on his face when I walked into his office instead of the Michael Stevens he was expecting was priceless. Recognition, followed immediately by unmistakable guilt. "Nathan," he said, frozen in place. "What are you doing here?" I closed the door behind me. "I think you know exactly why I'm here." To his credit, Alexander didn't attempt to deny anything. He sat heavily in his chair and ran his hand through his hair. "She told me you agreed to it," he said eventually. "Said you two had discussed using a donor and that you were comfortable with it being me." I stared at him incredulously. "And you believe that? That I'd be perfectly fine with my wife having her ex-boyfriend's baby?" He winced visibly. "Looking back, no, it doesn't make sense. But Rebecca can be persuasive." I muttered in agreement. "Tell me about it." Alexander continued. "For what it's worth, I wouldn't have consented if I'd known she was lying to you. I'm not that person." I wasn't certain I believed him, but ultimately it didn't matter. The damage was already done. As I turned to leave Alexander's office, I paused with one final question. "Did you two reconnect before or after Rebecca and I started trying for a baby?" He looked confused. "Before, I guess. She reached out maybe 4 years ago. Said she was attending a medical conference in Chicago and wanted to catch up over coffee. We've been in occasional contact since then." 4 years. The entire time we were planning our family, she had been laying groundwork for this elaborate deception. I nodded silently and walked out, feeling like the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to process the staggering depth of Rebecca's betrayal. This wasn't just a misguided decision about genetics. This was Rebecca meticulously planning for years to have her ex-boyfriend's baby, while married to me. I returned to David's apartment late that night. He and Melissa were already asleep, but Apollo was waiting by the door as if sensing I needed companionship. I scooped him up and sat on the guest bed, mechanically stroking his fur while contemplating my next steps. The following morning, I called Victoria and relayed my conversation with Alexander. "This is exactly what we needed," she confirmed, "but we should get more. Can you get Rebecca to admit any of this in writing? Text messages, emails, anything?" So I did something I'm not particularly proud of. I texted Rebecca claiming I wanted to discuss things rationally, that perhaps I had overreacted about the anonymous donor situation. I told her I was willing to listen if she would just be honest with me. She responded immediately, obviously relieved at this apparent softening of my position. We arranged to meet at our house that evening. Before going over, I reviewed the strategy with Victoria once more. She had already prepared the divorce papers, awaiting my final confirmation. When I arrived, Rebecca had clearly made significant effort. The house was immaculate. She'd prepared my favorite meal, even placed fresh flowers on the dining table as if we were having some romantic reconciliation dinner rather than discussing her monumental deception. "Nathan!" she exclaimed, rushing to embrace me when I entered. I allowed the hug, but remained passive, not returning it. "I've missed you so much," she whispered against my shoulder. I gently disengaged. "We need to talk," I said firmly, not sitting down despite her gesture toward the elaborately set table. Of course," she agreed quickly. "I want to explain everything." I nodded. "Good, because I have questions." I pulled out my phone and activated the recording app. "So tell me again about this donor, the anonymous one with the perfect genes." Rebecca launched into her rehearsed narrative about selecting the best genetic profile, about making the choice out of love for our future child. I let her finish before asking, "And there's no other reason you chose this particular donor?" She hesitated momentarily. "What do you mean?" I maintained steady eye contact. "I mean, is there anything else specific about him that influenced your decision?" Another brief pause. "No, just the health profile," she claimed. I nodded slowly. "So it has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that it's Alexander Thompson?" The color drained from Rebecca's face. "What?" she whispered. "I saw the emails, Rebecca. I spoke with Alexander. I know everything." She collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think," she sobbed. "Really?" I replied, my voice surprisingly level. "Because I think you deliberately chose your ex-boyfriend's sperm, had your friend Danielle circumvent clinic protocols, lied to me for months, and planned to let me raise another man's child without ever telling me the truth. Is that not exactly what happened?" Rebecca continued crying while stammering apologies, claiming she never meant to hurt me, insisting we could still be a family. I stopped the recording. I had what I needed. "I'm filing for divorce," I stated calmly. "I've already moved most of my possessions. You can keep the furniture, but the house is in my name, and I'll be selling it." "You can't do that," Rebecca exclaimed, suddenly panicked. "I'm pregnant. Where am I supposed to go?" I met her gaze directly. "That sounds like a problem for you and Alexander to resolve." She practically screamed, "He doesn't want anything to do with the baby. He just donated sperm. He's not ready to be a father." I nearly laughed at the irony. "Well, neither am I. At least not to this child." Apollo chose that moment to meow loudly from his carrier by the door. I'd brought him to collect the rest of his things. Through her tears, Rebecca pleaded, "Nathan, please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. We can work through this." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the last time as her husband. "No, Rebecca, you don't love me. You love what I provide. Stability, a home, a father for your baby. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." I picked up Apollo's carrier and headed for the door. "My lawyer will contact you about the divorce proceedings," I said without looking back. "Don't call me anymore." As I walked to my car, I experienced a strange mixture of emotions, anger and hurt certainly, but also an unexpected sense of relief, as if I'd finally cut loose an anchor that had been silently dragging me down. Apollo meowed again from his carrier. "I know, buddy," I told him quietly. "Let's go home, our real home." That evening I sent the recording to Victoria, who responded almost immediately. "Perfect," she admitted. "Enough. We move forward tomorrow." The subsequent weeks brought a whirlwind of legal meetings, paperwork, and planning. Victoria filed the divorce papers along with a motion to legally establish that I wasn't the father of Rebecca's baby. Throughout this period, Rebecca bombarded my phone with messages ranging from desperate apologies to angry accusations. "You're abandoning me when I need you most, and I can't believe you're being so cruel. And my personal favorite, it's still your baby in every way that matters." I blocked her number after that. David and Melissa generously allowed me to stay with them while I searched for a new place. I found a comfortable apartment that welcomed pets and wasn't too distant from my office. The most challenging aspect was handling friends and family who weren't privy to the complete story. Rebecca had apparently been telling people I'd experienced some kind of mental breakdown and abandoned her during pregnancy. Some actually believed her, which quickly showed me who my genuine friends were. My parents stood firmly behind me once I explained the situation. My mother cried when I told her she wouldn't be getting the grandchild we'd all been anticipating. My father simply placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're doing the right thing, son." When our court date finally arrived, Victoria presented the evidence methodically. The emails, texts, recorded conversation, testimony from the clinic about protocol violations, and Alexander's statement confirming Rebecca had misled him regarding my knowledge and consent. Every time Rebecca's attorney attempted to portray me as the villain for abandoning my pregnant wife, the judge would glance at the evidence folder and raise a skeptical eyebrow. The final judgment was precisely as Victoria had predicted. The divorce was granted. I had no legal or financial responsibility for the child, and Rebecca received nothing from our shared assets due to the extensively documented fraud. That was 8 months ago. I'm still in my apartment, though I'm considering purchasing a small house with a yard where Apollo can watch birds. He's doing wonderfully, by the way, currently sprawled across my keyboard as I write this. I temporarily deleted all social media to avoid the drama, but when I eventually returned online, I discovered Rebecca had moved back to her hometown in Minnesota to live with her parents. The baby, a boy, was born 2 months ago, according to mutual friends who still maintain contact with her. I try not to dwell on it. Looking back, I'm amazed at how quickly someone I thought I knew completely could become a stranger. The Rebecca I married and the Rebecca who orchestrated this elaborate deception can't possibly be the same person. Yet they are, and I simply didn't recognize it until it was nearly too late. If there's any lesson to take from my experience, perhaps it's that you never truly know someone, even after years together. People can surprise you in the most devastating ways, but also, you're stronger than you imagine. 8 months ago, I believed my life was effectively over. Now, I'm doing all right. Not great, not terrible, just okay. And sometimes, okay is sufficient. Apollo jumps into my lap as I finish writing, purring contentedly, as if to remind me that not everything in my life was built on deception. That some connections, even those with a cat, can be genuine and uncomplicated. And for now, that's enough.